So I think we're back in this little mode here. I'm going to move this all up here out of the way. Ooh, look at that now. Shrink this one down here. So it can be part two of our J.P. Morgan lesson. And so yesterday we kind of went into a little bit of a background of how Morgan made his money and what he would do to to sort of like revolutionize how finance capitalism worked. Let's look today at Morgan the man and some of what he's like as a private person and also some kind of quirky failures because not everybody succeeds. So, first of all, when you have gobs and gobs of cash, you can buy lots of stuff. Morgan was a collector and he collected lots of different things. So, he collected books to begin with, and a large section of his books ended up in the New York Public Library later as part of their collection of exclusive collection. He was a collector of paintings, which probably is not surprising that he was an art history major as well as a math major. In fact, his painting collection was the foundation of the New York Museum of Art. He was also a gem collector. His gem collection was the U.S. Gemological's display at the 1889 and 1900 World's Fairs, and additionally, it also served as the foundation of the American Museum of Natural History's gem collection. Now, it's saying something when you reach the point in time where you're not only a collector, but you're so highly regarded that you actually, behold, this is Morganite. It is a gemstone named after J.P. Morgan, a semi-precious gem. Kind of cool, kind of weird looking, kind of weird in color, which is something kind of along with that too in a moment. Now, in addition to all of his collecting, Morgan was also a philanthropist. A philanthropist, this comes from the Greek word meaning lover of man, philos meaning love, and anthros meaning man or human. It's basically a person who gives to charity. And Morgan gave a lot of money to charity. So not only we talked briefly about, his paintings being at the Museum of Art and his gems at the American Museum of Natural History, Morgan started Harvard Medical School. So there would be no Harvard Medical College if it weren't for J.P. Morgan. Morgan started the original Trinity College in New York. There are now Trinities all over the United States. He built hundreds of hospitals and schools in New York City, many of which bore his name for a long time. This one is kind of weirdly ironic in its own way. Morgan was a great admirer and believer in the need to preserve Native American culture and history. And he saw it rapidly disappearing. And in order to preserve it for future generations to be able to understand and appreciate, he hired one of the most famous photographers in America, a guy named Edward Curtis, to go around the country and to visually document Native American culture. The irony of this is that Morgan himself hated photographers. The pictures of Morgan were all staged so that all you saw was the front view of Morgan. Let's go back here real quick let's go back to our first couple of pages, and I'll show you an example of this. See, so you see JP, but all you see is JP's like front view. You see no profile pics. That's because Morgan was not a big fan of the profile picture. And whoops, went too far there. In fact, let's go over here real quick. This is a picture of Morgan from the side view. Look at that nose, man. That nose is kind of terrifying. In fact, this picture was taken at a school dedication ceremony. This girl right here, I believe, is one of his nieces. There's another picture that follows up shortly thereafter that shows him lifting up a cane and threatening the photographer, who he then beat physically with the cane. Morgan suffered from a rare physical skin condition that caused his nose to get gigantic and bulby and bumpy and veiny and all purpley. It was kind of like the purpley color of this thing, which is where I kind of honestly think that Morganite got its name from, but that's just me. He also was a big sponsor of the World Conference of Churches, which was an organization that attempted to bring together the various religions of the world and find the points that they held in common as opposed to what they disagreed on, in an effort to sort of bring harmony and peace to people. As far as his worldview, he is the definition of where we get the modern ideas of political and economic conservatism. Morgan was a big supporter of the free market, which is ironic given the fact that his obsession with the need for efficiency and reducing waste led to the creation of monopolies, which are genuinely anti free market. He was a practicing Episcopalian Christian, which is the Americanized version of the Church of England. And Morgan really brought his religious views into his business practices, which we'll talk about in a second. Morgan also took a long term view of things. He was not somebody who focused or looked only at the transient changing things. He looked at the big picture long term. What was this going to be like down the road in years to come? And he really set the standards for what the view of a conservative religion politically was going into the 20th century. Now, privately, his New York home was the first to have electric lights. Not a surprise, he owned the electrical company, and it was a nice way that he brought in all of his friends and turned on the lights, and they're like, "This is so incredible. We want electricity in our house too." And Morgan was happy to sell his millionaire friends lighting for their houses. He was married, had 4 kids. He smoked 20 cigars a day. That's incredible. Um, and we're not talking about like cheap cigars. We're talking about like expensive cigars. Cigars that would be like the equivalent of paying a couple of $100s a piece for. He's running through these things every day. I mean, he literally smoked something like, and this is back then money, over $100 a day worth of cigars. Yeah. He belonged to several exclusive private clubs. This is just a rich person thing where they belong to these clubs and, they do these weird things and whatever it is that they do. And he really enjoyed yachting. Now, he was not without his criticisms or without his critics. Um, the left really hated him and they resented him for his wealth. This is a common theme among liberals. They really are resentful of people of wealth. Even if they themselves have money, they're just resentful of people who have more money than them. There was also probably some legitimate observation that maybe Morgan had too much influence over things. So we can see in this picture that the diminutive little troll in the funky pajamas, this is Uncle Sam, the personification of America. And he's in a rowboat with J.P. Morgan as the giant fisherman. And it's like, with Uncle Sam here with his little hands, "Hey, big boy." Okay, Uncle Sam thinks he's rowing the boat. No, Morgan is actually rowing the boat to where it's going to go and what it's going to do. Because Morgan had the money and controlled the government. Um, Morgan his religious beliefs earned quite a bit of criticism too. Morgan believed that religiously he was bound by certain codes that he was sort of like his money was an obligation, a moral obligation to him, and he needed to do certain things with it. And even in his business practices, the way that he administered control of the companies that he was in charge of and everything else, he genuinely felt he was doing something from a religious perspective. Um, and quite frankly, many people just get upset with anybody who tries to bring their religion into their workplace or into their views of things. Um, Also, Morgan was blamed, rightly or wrongly, for the Panic of 1907. The Panic of 1907 was a very brief economic crisis. It lasted a couple of months. The stock market basically crashed out of fear that one of Morgan's companies, a trust that he was making, was going to be broken up by the government. In the end, the government had to let him keep his monopoly, and the economy recovered quickly. Um, Morgan and his business partners were worth $22.5 billion in cash. And by cash, I mean gold. And the growing concern for Morgan's influence over the economy and politics actually led eventually to the establishment of the Federal Reserve System to sort of counter Morgan's bank system. The irony is that Morgan is the guy who helped set up the Federal Reserve System, which we'll talk about a little bit later too. Talk about the fox watching the hens in the chicken coop. Now, Morgan died peacefully while he was on a yachting tour of Europe. He died in Italy. His body was sent home to be buried in the family plot. Unfortunately for the Morgan family, Morgan Jr., Morgan's son, didn't have his influence and power, and slowly but surely the government picked apart Morgan's great financial empire. Now, there's another long term lasting legacy of Morgan, and that is J.P. Morgan is the inspiration for Uncle Pennybags. Yes, Mr. Monopoly. The game of Monopoly is based on J.P. Morgan and his business empire. This is why the railroads in Monopoly are named after Morgan's railroads. This is why there's the electric company and the waterworks. At one time, Morgan actually owned Niagara Falls, at least the power station on it. So the idea of you control blocks of colors that you can therefore charge people for the use of, and you want to try to get an entire block under your control, essentially to create a monopoly. The game is based on the business principles and philosophies of J.P. Morgan, and the guy who made it openly said that. Okay. Now, everybody fails, no matter who you are. There's always going to be failures, and Morgan is no exception. And I just want to pick out three quirky little failures just to highlight. Number one, the London Underground. An underground is a subway system. Morgan noticed that there was really no competition in London. There was only one subway company. So he thought, why not make another one? Apparently, what he didn't realize was that the reason there's only one subway company in London is that London was geologically unstable, and there were very few areas you could safely put subway tubes. Morgan ended up collapsing something like a block of downtown London, and that quickly killed off his London Underground aspirations and also cost him a load of money. The IMMC, the International Mercantile Marine Corporation, was a shipbuilding company that Morgan owned. They built the Titanic. You want to talk about epic failure? There you go. And last but not least, maybe the weirdest thing ever, the Wardenclyffe wireless telegraphy tower. So, in the 1890s, telegraphing was the main way of communication between Europe and America. And it was done via a gigantic telegraph cable that was laid on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean. This cable had a rather annoying tendency of breaking, which meant that they were constantly laying new cable, and it was really expensive. Enter maybe the most brilliant human being in history, Nikola Tesla, the dude they named the cars after, who came to J.P. Morgan with an idea. Now, Tesla's idea is based on something called the unified field theory. And I'm going to give you a very overly simple version of this. The unified field theory states that every object in the universe vibrates at a subatomic level with its own frequency. And that if you can identify the frequency that something is vibrating at, you can actually tap into the vibration itself and you can manipulate the energy. This, by the way, is true. And Tesla's kind of the pioneer of this. Well, his idea was that you could tap into the natural harmonic vibration of the world around you and use it to transport waves of sound to create a wireless telegraphy system, or in the future, a wireless phone system. And he approached J.P. Morgan about this idea. Now, at one time, Tesla had indirectly worked for J.P. Morgan, and Morgan was always up for an idea. So Morgan floated him something, I think, around $50,000 of back then money to do this. And months went by, and Morgan heard absolutely nothing on the progress of this. And one day, Tesla comes into his office, and he's like, I need more money. And Morgan's like, can I get an update on how our wireless telegraphy is going? And Tesla's like, wireless telegraphy? Puh. No, 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 no. That's just dumb. We're going to do something better. And Morgan's like, what are you talking about? So Tesla outlines this. The money that Morgan gave him was used to build a gigantic metal mushroom on the top of a building. The metal mushroom sent waves of energy out. They would go into the ground where they would tap into the Earth's natural harmonic frequencies. And instead of providing wireless communication, they provided 100% free electricity to everybody in the area. Now, by the way, this actually, Tesla had done this. He had a research station in Colorado where, like, you literally, he had figured out the way to do this. You could literally put energy into the ground and you could screw a light bulb into the dirt and it would turn on. Okay. When Morgan heard this, he immediately shut down the entire project because, after all, if you own the electrical company, you don't want somebody giving away free electricity. The goofy, weird metal mushroom was actually used later as a radio tower. Radio was invented shortly thereafter by Guglielmo Marconi, which, funny name anyways, but it was then taken down and sold for scrap metal. This building, by the way, is still there in Wardenclyffe, New York. It currently houses toxic waste. But if you go here, they actually sent a crew of investigators in, and they discovered a series of underground tunnels and networks that actually utilized the principles that Tesla set up and would have provided free electricity. I will post a video about that. If you want to watch it for extra credit and write a little paragraph about it, you can. But this is the end of the section on J.P. Morgan. And after this, we're going to jump into looking at labor and business relations. Okay, so this is it. Peace and love.